Hi, I'm Paul Harstead, and this is Random Inventions, a new YouTube series. It's all about turning fantasy and science fiction into scientific theories and inventions, and this particular section is about Dungeons and Dragons spells. In particular, the wizard spells from 3.5 edition and the very beginning ones. So here are the rules for me. Basically, in this series, I try to take an effect from fantasy or science fiction and try to interpret it into a real possible effect, and then try to find a reasonable scientific theory on how to create the effect. And then I try to optimize the theory for practicality, efficiency, effectiveness, and originality. And sometimes I'll be citing research sources and mentioning models, although not always. It kind of depends on whether it's necessary. I won't be building any prototypes, but I might be building models or simulations depending on my time and how interested I am. There may be some dangerous sort of effects within this series, and I may not work on certain ones or reveal knowledge if it's too dangerous. Anyway, all this is copyrighted, and if you find any of it fascinating, you can contact me, and you should keep in mind that any invention in this won't pass the originality test for patents because it's public access now that I've released it. So, in this particular video, I'm going to be using spells from Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. It's my favorite editions of Dungeons and Dragons, and Wizards spells are more focused on like things you can actually create with physics and more believable in my opinion. And it's closer to my know-how. So in this particular video, I'm just doing level 0 spells, which should be the easiest, and I'll be doing higher level and harder spells later on. Feel free to comment on my theories and submit your own if you're interested. Alright, so here's the whole spell list, and I'm not going to go over everything here, but every spell has a name and has a certain effect, and then I have an interpretation of what that effect could mean in the real world, or what would cause that effect in the real world, just basically a translation of it. And if you want to sort of play along as a game and come up with your own theories, you can pause the video and write some comments down or come up with your own theories, and please do so now if you want to. Now, the first one is resistance, which in the game adds to saving throws, which if you don't know about D&D, it's basically your ability to avoid things. It's based off of fortitude, willpower, and reflex or dexterity. And so my interpretation is to just increase reaction speed, mentally and physically. So my thought process is the best way to increase reaction speed and the easiest is largely going to be a pharmacological approach, drugs. And for increasing speed physically, and reducing pain, NSAIDs, which are typical over-the-counter drugs, will reduce inflation and pain, so that might help a little bit. And So you could use Advil and Tylenol crushed up to speed up the drug absorption. So a good supply of salts and water will also increase reaction speed. So that's what Gatorade is primarily used for. Pedialyte is better than Gatorade because it has a better mix of salts, and it has like more potassium, more magnesium, stuff like that. It just has a much better mix of salts and fixes dehydration better. We're going to want stimulants to speed up our reaction time, both mentally and physically, and caffeine is a very common one and easily accessible as caffeine powder. And then you can take a powdered B vitamin, complex B vitamin, and then there are supplements called L-Dopa and tyrosine, which help you produce more dopamine, and those combined can speed us up a little bit, and more than just caffeine. So taking a minor anti-anxiety pill would probably help as well, because it like evens out the mind and reduces hesitation, jitters, and stressors, and it allows you to focus just a little bit better. So L-theanine, which is a common supplement, and then T, 5-HTP, a common supplement. Magnesium is a salt, but fairly common to get. And kava is a plant drug. That might be helpful, and there are more you can look into. And I would ground and mix all this in Pedialyte, and that basically it will cause us to have increased reaction speed, and a much safer way of doing it than a much more potent way of doing it than just taking a normal energy drink. So if you don't know what Pedialyte is, it's basically a children's drink for dehydration. And it just has a good mix of salts, and it's kind of similar to Gatorade except better. All right, acid splash. You deal a certain amount of acid damage, and my interpretation is you cause like a permanent acid damage to an object or animal. I gotta say, this is dangerous. Just like don't fool around with acid if you don't know what you're doing, and definitely don't damage things or people. That should be obvious. A common acid that is very strong is sulfuric acid. You probably have all heard of this. It'll cause acidic damage to materials or flesh. The more concentrated, the more dangerous. And it's pretty easy to obtain, honestly, in unconcentrated forms. And you can contain it in glass or ceramic containers. And just for the purposes of conversation, it could potentially be launched by that container by a small slingshot, or on a crossbow bolt, or like on top of a javelin of some sort. Alright, so detect poison. This one's kind of hard, and I interpret it as detect possible poisons of chemicals. You're going to want to separate the chemicals if possible. You can do so by weight in some type of centrifuge, or by vaporizing them, like turning them into different types of steam and separating that, sort of like they should vaporize at different rates. And then you can test the chemicals to determine whether they're acidic or basic using pH strips. So poison is normally highly basic, and it's rarely highly acidic, but it should kind of be in either of those two categories, unless it's like bacteria or something like that. But most poisons, so this isn't going to find like all toxins, but most poisons you'll find are highly basic. So you can make a device that contains most of these components, which I'm not really going to go into detail here. And then you kind of got the magic effect of detecting poison, or an invention that does it. Detect magic. I interpret this as detecting electromagnetic fields. So we're going to focus on detecting magnetic fields, which should detect electrical flow anyway. So two compasses at the very basic, two compasses at like right angles to each other should be enough to identify strong magnetic fields in 3D space. You might have to get kind of close to it depending on the sensitivity of the compass. And so like a cooler idea would be to have a gyroscope containing a compass inside, so it could rotate not just like as a compass on one plane, but in all planes, or in all directions. And it could rotate and sort of point at magnetic attraction. Neither of these are particularly sensitive. Compasses, like you can get better compasses, but I'm smoking, by the way, if you hear that sound. But neither of them are very sensitive compasses normally. So and they don't really deal with overlapping fields very well. They kind of just show you what the closest strong field is. So more sensitive instrument might be a container filled with like a low density fluid or gas. So I guess you could just have water at the basic level in a container, and then you want to have small magnetic dust, so like perhaps iron filings or something like that, small iron dust, and potentially have them dyed or colored. And you should see the dust flow and patterns and directions that are sort of consistent with the electromagnetic fields around. And if a new field gets introduced, that should cause a change in their movement. So that could be more sensitive. At its highest level, you would want like magnetic filings in pressurized air rather than, or iron filings in iron dust or colored iron dust in pressurized air rather than water, because that would just allow it to lightly float a little bit better. So, and or another way of looking at it, you could have, if you have the chemical have about the same weight as water, it would take some time. I mean, same weight as iron. It would take some time, but you could see movement over time with that. Alright, read magic. This is really the one that's the most complicated. I'm interpreting it as translate odd or ancient script. This is really more computer science based, but some things might be. It's just not physics based. A computer app, or at least I don't have a physics based way of doing this. So you could have a computer app assist with translation, similar to Google Translate. So you could have optical character recognition, probably trained on, probably some type of machine learning trained on many writings and many languages. And then from there, once you know what words you're picking out, you can search multiple dictionaries, lexicons, and thesauri for words in that language, and you from that you basically have other words that combine, and you can cross-reference it to the other languages, or take out its meaning, sort of cross-reference that. So then you would hopefully have a way of identifying proper sentence structure between languages. And then you would print out the multiple results, hopefully, more than Google Translate. You would print out basically multiple options of the translation, with different structures, words, and expanded meanings. So like certain words would expand to the dictionary meaning, and then that would allow the user to cross-reference and better understand by looking at all those options. So that's my idea for a comprehensive translation program, and this is a far larger project than anything else on the zero spells list. Dancing lights. You're creating floating light sources. So firstly, I wanted to identify low-weight ways of producing light. Batteries and light bulbs, batteries are pretty high weight per energy, and they're just pretty high weight in general. So, and having them float too would be kind of ridiculous considering how much they weigh. But chemical luminescence, glow stick stuff would work. But I ended up sort of settling on candles or burning things, burning cloth, paper, or leaves. And that is basically a small glass container with tiny air inlets, so it's limiting airflow, and a tiny air exhaust at the top. And the lid would be unsealable, so you could refuel it and light it on fire. But by limiting the airflow, you're limiting the burn rate, so you're slowing down how fast it burns. The hot air could be channeled into a balloon. So you're basically creating a hot air balloon, and that's giving you light. And then you're using a string to move it around. And it's also similar to a larger Chinese candle. So it's just a small hot air balloon that's with a lamp on the bottom, and you just drag it around with a little string or rope. Flare. So in the game it's called dazzle. You dazzle a creature, but it's interpreted as disorienting someone or an animal visually. So I happen to know through other research that high intensity light and upper blue light particularly is disorienting to eyes. So I would create a flash emitted from a flashlight. You probably wouldn't need more than 2 double-D batteries, but you would need a lot of capacitors. And the ones used in camera flashes are pretty good capacitors that can store a lot of charge and discharge rapidly. So they would work perfectly using many or multiple of those. And then you attach them to upper blue LEDs, just blue LEDs that could be high intensity, and LEDs normally have the ability to be higher intensity, and you just activate it. And then once you do that, the stored charge of the capacitors would be released much faster than batteries normally do, and it emits a very high intensity blue light that would momentarily blind an animal. So I think that one's pretty cool. The police have blue flashlights that are fairly intense that are kind of doing this, but the difference with this idea is the capacitors and flash like a camera flash Um, so like that would make the light much higher intensity, and emit it at once basically. It'd emit all that stored energy at once. So then you have light, which is sort of similar to dancing lights, except you want to cause any object to glow or emit light. So I got to figure out a way to attach light to something, or a light source to something. So you could have, again, chemical luminescent glue or paint, or you could have a burning glue and paint. For the burning version, you can styrofoam you can mix with gasoline until it comes like a glue rubber. And then you can like basically apply that glue to various objects and light it on fire, and it's reasonably low heat. It burns fairly slowly depending on the mixture. It's kind of called homemade napalm, but it really doesn't burn hot enough to be anywhere close to napalm. It is very sticky though. And it'll burn and give light for reasonably long time. Actual napalm is far more dangerous, and it's not what I'm trying to cover here. For the glowing version, you could use chemicals inside glow sticks, which you can research if you like, and they're like fairly commonplace. Or you could just get them from glow sticks. So you would mix them into two separate paints, because they're two separate chemical mixtures, and you would sort of like mix it in with a inert paint, and then you would mix the paints together right before painting an object with the now glowing paint. Alright, Ray of Frost. You deal costs, lasting or damage from cold, so you deal in the game a small amount of cold damage. This is also dangerous, or like intended for harm. So producing cold is actually like ridiculously difficult in comparison to producing heat. So harness. So the easiest way to harness cold is to bring some cold with you, and so having dry ice in something like a thermos would be very helpful here. And so you could use pressurized and chilled gas like contained within the dry ice container, and it could be nitrogen potentially, and that could be propelled in through a narrow tube, coiling through the chamber also, and spiraled out of the nozzle, and would produce intensely cold and dense gas at a target within a small distance. So depending on the narrowness of the nozzle and also how much you spiral the gas, you can get greater distances. This is because spiraling the gas can create a vacuum in the middle through vortices, which kind of sucks the gas in tighter. So like basically you're throwing out tiny little tornadoes, which can go longer distances than just trying to throw gas. So that's kind of cool, I think, at least the vortice part. Alright, this one's a little boring. You're causing sound at a distance. So the best solution I came up with was very simple. Tiny speakers playing a recorded sound, like similar to the ones that come in gift cards. And you could throw them inside like paper airplanes or cloth sacks to have them have distance. The more complex route and like ridiculously complex actually, would be if you could direct high intensity sound but very narrowly, which is ridiculously hard to do, considering that sound vibrates and spreads out so much. But if you could direct it narrowly enough, you could have some type of device throw it off of a distant surface, or bounce it off of this different distant surface, and that would make it seem like it came from the surface rather than the actual source. Mage Hand, you cause movement at a distance of up to 5 pounds. So you're basically lifting and moving objects of up to 5 pounds at a distance. So like you're not actually moving all the way there yourself. So I came up with a drone with a certain type of arm and grabber. The drone would be like a normal quadcopter, and then an arm that extends underneath. The arm would be able to point in any direction, as well as rotate and turn. So it would have multiple joints basically, and that allows it to turn like a hand, or rotate like the elbow and shoulder. So it would be unique in that, like, the only thing really original here is I guess the combination, and also the hand grabber. I want to be, or the thing that functions as a grabber or a hand, I want to be like a suction cup, and where the middle of it has a tiny air hole that produces suction. So it looks like a suction cup, and it's rubber, but there's a tiny hole in the middle that sucks in, and at high speed and high pressure. And the cup, rather than a hard suction cup, would be flexible enough that the cup will start to close itself due to the air suction. And so basically what I imagine is, let's say you're trying to pick up a spoon or something. You put the cup up to the spoon, and you start sucking on the spoon, and the cup starts closing around the spoon due to the high suction. And I think this type of grabber should be able to grab almost any type of object. It just can't really do it with precision. Like, you can't write, obviously. That's just far more complicated. Alright, so Mending. Make minor repairs to any object. I kind of had fun with this one. Did a little extra research. So, like, in order to make repairs, we kind of need a binding agent or glue, plus a patching material like cloth, rope, or tape. Simple real-life equivalent is duct tape, but I wanted to make something a little bit better. So for the glue, I would use basically super glue, but I would mix it with baking soda or lime. I think the lime you have to mix in afterwards. Maybe the baking soda you have to mix in afterwards before you apply it. The lime you might be able to do earlier, basically. So this will make it able to be used as a filler or repair larger regions, or potentially, like, you could even make like some type of mold and construct minor parts, because it's basically working as like some type of cement at this point, fast cement. And the tape I also wanted to be as strong as possible. So in my mind, I'm thinking fiberglass is cheap and ridiculously strong. So fiberglass cloth coated with plastic would make extremely strong tape. And this tape is basically the same thing as duct tape, except much stronger than normal duct tape. It would be ridiculously strong. And then by using these two in conjunction or together, you should be able to do like almost any repair, or at least most repairs. Whispered conversation at a distance. You could have a headset with a tunable radio. You just need a few batteries. And then that whole thing could be inside a motorcycle helmet to reduce overhearing if you want it to be. This one is kind of a little boring because all the components are it's just combining different components really. Open and close, you open and close something at a distance, or just cause something to open and close. So like a button or a remote would cause something to open or close. So I'm thinking about something that kind of looks like a bolt lock, but you have two magnets that are attached on either side of the lock, and one to say the door and one to the wall. And when they're facing north end to south end, the object would close because they're attracted together. And when they're facing north to north, and you could have this happen by rotating one of the magnets, the object would be just pushed into opening. As long as it doesn't have something else stopping it. So that, not really that cool in application, but it's kind of a nice solution, I think. Arcane Mark, you write in invisible ink. I think everyone's like done this experiment as a kid in like science class or whatever, where you, or most people in America have at least, you can use lemon juice to write stuff, and that can be viewed under violet light or ultraviolet light, or black lights basically. So you could also, you're doing basically the same thing here. You're taking lemon juice and you're boiling it down to a more concentrated form, which will create more of an ink. And then you could also add a small amount of flour to make the liquid more adhesive and making it more like a paint. So it's kind of cool to add a little new stuff to that. I also had a lot of fun with this one, prestidigitation. You're basically supposed to be able to do in the game like all sorts of minor tricks with it. And my interpretation is like start a fire, minor tool actions. They also say in the game like you should be able to flavor food or clean things. So I was thinking some kind of multi-tool or container. And I came up with a, so like, just to explain more about this, I want to keep things pretty original. Like even if there's a common solution, I want to come up with some originality to add to it. Because this is really just a game of invention and pondering and wondering. And entertaining through that. So I'm imagining some kind of narrow rod like enclosure, and the inside of it can be rotated to conceal or expose 6 sides, and each side would have something similar to Swiss Army knife or small containers you could store things in. And this is kind of like the idea behind a spice rack, sort of. Have you seen those? Or the openings on salt containers, you just rotate till something is revealed. And that could be basically a Swiss Army knife with 5 other tools in it. And so, supplies you could have in it, you could have crafting or cleaning supplies, or flavoring for food. And the rod itself, I imagine, could be attached to another one, hopefully a different one, or one that contains something different. And they can be attached by the top or bottom to like extend them. And then so you could even have a walking staff that basically has 100 tools on it and 100 containers, and that and you could take off part of it to use the tools or something, detach it. Anyway, that's the end of my spell list 1. I'm going to be doing higher level spells and much more difficult inventions later. I hope you were entertained, and I hope you tune in for when I do some famous Dungeons and Dragons spells like Magic Missile or Shield or Armor. And really, with some of those, I'm going to go really in depth and build models and more. And then later on, much more difficult spells will come up, such as invisibility or greater invisibility, and also spells that eventually are just, there's no way we know of in physics to do that kind of thing, such as gate, which is multi-dimensional travel. And I'll still try to come up with a theory for how to achieve that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Later.